everyone, welcome back to the channel, or welcome to the channel if you're new. Today I'm going to be talking about my experience giving birth on Polis OMS, or basically the free Russian healthcare system. Did I like it? Did I not like it? How did my experience here compare to my experience back in the US? Let's get right into it. So first off, let's talk a little bit about my experience giving birth in the US, because I have a little bit of an unusual background. I gave birth to all three of our children at home. I know, shocking, terrifying. Don't worry, it was very clean, it was very sanitary, and I had medical professionals, licensed medical professionals there. Giving birth at home is legal in the US in most states, and there are licensed midwives who are very knowledgeable, who see you throughout your entire pregnancy. Don't worry, it was a very safe method of birth, but it is very different from giving birth in a hospital. However, I also do have experience with the American hospital system. When our daughter was very sick, we stayed in the hospital with her for 5 days, and I got to kind of observe what the American hospital system and medical system is like. So that's kind of my background coming into this. It's my first hospital birth, but not my first hospital experience. So like we said in our life update video, this baby was 2 weeks early. So because of that, I didn't have a chance to see a Russian doctor prior to her birth. However, one big difference between Russia and the US is the ambulance system. In the US, you have to pay through the nose for an ambulance. That's an American phrase. It's an English phrase that means you have to pay a lot of money to get an ambulance. So most people choose to drive to the hospital unless they are dying, like they're having a heart attack or something really serious is happening. They do not call an ambulance. So it felt very strange for me to call an ambulance just for labor, but I was so grateful for this service. It was absolutely fantastic to be able to have medical professionals come to my house and take me to the hospital. So my friend, who's been helping me through this entire process, you know who you are, thank you so much again. She actually called the ambulance for us and came to our house before the ambulance arrived and went with me in the ambulance to the hospital. And I'm so grateful for her and for that. And because I hadn't seen a doctor prior to coming, they needed to do a lot of checkups. Like they needed to do an ultrasound to see the size of the baby. They needed to do a blood test. They needed to check different things. And asked me a bunch of questions because I just didn't have a medical history. So they needed to check all these things. So when I first got to the hospital, that's what they were working on, and they were working quickly, and everyone was very kind to me. There is a stereotype that Russian medical professionals are not very friendly. This is true, but they're not unkind. That's the difference. In the US, there is an expectation for nurses to kind of be all cute and sweet and friendly. They don't have that here, but they were not unkind. They were all very kind to me and did their job very well and very efficiently. And that's the most important thing, to be honest. After they had done all the preliminary checkup stuff, they moved me into a birthing room. And I had my own birthing room I didn't share with anybody else. And it was a very big room. It was a very nice room. Everything was extremely clean, extremely modern. I was very impressed with everything I saw. And one very cool thing, the birthing room had a birthing tub in the corner, which I was really impressed by because not even all maternity hospitals in the US have those. It wasn't long before the room was filled with doctors and nurses because they could tell that I was progressing very quickly. One difference between giving birth at home versus giving birth in the hospital, and I do think this is true of the US as well as Russia, it's not just a Russian thing, is that you're poked and prodded a lot more. It is kind of more painful just because there's a difference in philosophy. It is a slightly different experience. The other thing that was very different was once they were ready for me to push the baby out, they told me when to push. Whereas giving birth at home, the midwife usually waits and sees when you feel ready to push. It's a very different thing. Now, this is not a Russia versus American thing. In American hospitals, they do the same thing where you are told when to push. But it was new for me because I'd only ever given birth at home. So that was a new part of the experience as well. When the baby was born, they put her on my stomach for a few seconds so I was able to see her, and then they whisked her away. That's also a big difference between giving birth at home versus giving birth in the hospital. At home, they give you the baby and you basically keep the baby with you until they have finished taking care of you. Then they will look at the baby. And so it's usually about 30 minutes that you're holding the baby close to you before they look her over. In this case, I especially understand why they needed to take her away, because they didn't know anything about her. We hadn't been to a doctor here in Russia. And so they needed to make sure that she was fine. And so I understand why they needed to whisk her away and not have her with me. They were very sweet though, because I would ask, like, is she okay? Is she okay? And they would say, yes, she's fine. And at one point, while they were taking her from one station to another, they brought her back to me so I could give her a quick kiss, and then they continued to work on her. So basically that was a big difference for me, but it wasn't that big of a deal. It was just a difference that I noticed. So once they'd finished taking care of me and they had finished taking care of her, they brought us back together and they had her swaddled, like double swaddled. So she had like one swaddle where it was covering her head and it was a kind of thinner cloth, and then they had a wool swaddle over top of that. I had never seen that before. She was quite warm, very, very warm. And they told me that she could stay with me. I think that's kind of the norm. Correct me if I'm wrong, but at least at the maternity hospital, the Rodom that I was at, it seemed like having your baby with you in your room was the norm, what was considered the most common thing. Unless something was very wrong with the baby or with the mother. So they moved us off the bed we were on onto a kind of a stretcher thing, and then they brought us upstairs to the maternity ward. They wheeled me into a shared room with 2 other women and 2 other babies, and they got me all set up. I had my own light. I had my own kind of bell thing that I could press to call a nurse to me. The nurse who took me up there and got me settled in was so sweet, and she asked me, it's like, have you had any water? And I said, not really much at all. And so she brought me 2 big cups of water, and she said, make sure you drink both of these before you go to sleep. So what was the shared room like? So basically we had 3 beds and 3 cribs. We had kind of a changing station. We had a table with 2 chairs. We had a refrigerator that didn't work, which was too bad. But I think it was because there just wasn't a outlet where the refrigerator was. I do think there was access to a refrigerator somewhere, because I think one of my roommates was using a refrigerator, but that specific refrigerator wasn't working. And then there was a bathroom for the 3 of us. And the bathroom was very, very nice, had everything you needed, was very, very clean. Everything throughout the hospital was so, so clean. Also, we had access to warm and hot water as much as we wanted right outside our room, which was so, so convenient and so nice. Now, because you've just given birth and you can't really get up very well, the nurses actually would come in and they did the first 3 diaper changes for us. So within that first 8 to 24 hours while we're still recovering, they did all those diaper changes for us. Also, one very nice thing that isn't always true in US hospitals is every single test was done in front of us. Like, they never took the baby away from you. The furthest they took the baby away was maybe to the changing area in the same room with you. You could still see your baby. You knew what was going on. They made sure and told you what they were about to do. You usually had to sign for it. It was very much, everything was very open. Everything was very honest. And there was never any question of, like, where's my baby? Who has her and what's going on? They also never offered the nursery, which to me wasn't a negative thing. I didn't really want the nursery, but I also appreciated that they really respected that bond between mother and baby. Sometimes in American hospitals, they can push the nursery. It kind of depends on the hospital. So I was very impressed by that as well. Also, the assumption was that you were nursing. which I also appreciated as well. Like the diet that we were given was based on the idea that we were nursing mothers. So they were giving us food that was very beneficial for nursing, healthy, and also would not upset the baby's stomach. So that was very nice as well. Now, the hospital food still was hospital food, so some of it was really not that good, but it was all very healthy and it was filling. So they did what they needed to do, just they could probably improve it by making it taste a little bit nicer. But yeah. So what was it like sharing a room on Police OMS? Because I didn't pay extra to have my own room. And I actually think that was quite a nice thing. On the surface, it sounds like you would want your own room, but actually sharing a room ended up being a huge blessing for me. So one thing I found out later is that they tried to learn about the women and then match them up with other women so that the roommate situation is amicable and positive. And that's exactly what happened in my case. They put me with two other women who are also foreigners, and they were both really wonderful women. They took good care of me. They were so generous and they were so kind. And both of them had larger families. One had just given birth to her third baby, the other had just given birth to her fourth baby. So we all understood each other, which was really nice. And one of my roommates could speak a little bit of English, so she kind of could help me try to understand what on earth the medical professionals were trying to tell me, because that is a vocabulary set I am not at all familiar with, so that was a bit of a challenge. So like I said, these women were so generous. They would share their snacks, they would share their food, they would help look after each other's babies, and my baby if we were out of the room. It was a wonderful situation. I am so grateful that I had those roommates. So it was definitely a very positive thing. Another thing that I also really noticed during my stay there was how careful the doctors were. Here, every single doctor was super careful, and they weren't going to let you leave or be discharged even if one thing was out of normal. We're not talking a big problem. We're talking even one tiny thing. If one tiny thing was out of the norm, you had to stay another day or two. But I was so grateful that they were being so careful. I didn't experience that same level of extreme professionalism and care in the American hospital. And we were in a very good American hospital. Now, let me say, they were very good. In the American hospital, they were excellent. They did a great job. But this was even better. They did an even better job in this hospital. I was even more impressed with how I was treated and how I was cared for and how Elise was cared for. I was even more impressed with what they were doing. So what was the document process like in the hospital? So they have a MFITSE in the hospital itself. So you can actually go and get the birth certificate right there. In our case, being Americans, there was some confusion for the MFITSE people on some of our documentation, especially my maiden name versus married name. They wanted me to have a document showing that I changed my maiden name to my married name, but under American law, no such document exists. They don't give you such a document. That just our law system's completely different. Higher level people in MFITSE understand that, but lower level people who are not used to dealing with Americans don't usually understand that. So we had to end up going to our local MFITSE, and they understood how to properly handle our documents and get our daughter's birth certificate. But unfortunately, at the hospital, they just weren't aware of this. They weren't very knowledgeable when it comes to foreign documents and how to handle those. Otherwise, though, it would be very nice and very convenient to be able to do everything that way. But unfortunately, in our case, it didn't work out like that. Overall, though, they do try to streamline the document process for you, make it easy, make it simple. Another thing that was interesting, and a difference between giving birth in the US versus giving birth here in Russia, was you got, I think what's called a hospital gift. I apologize, that is both our neighbor upstairs and my daughter. I think they're having an argument, and I think those are doors slamming. I'm not sure, but I think so. And she should be napping, but she isn't. You get to choose between a sum of money or a box full of items. It was very a wonderful surprise to be able to receive that gift from the hospital. And we were able to receive it. Being foreigners, I wasn't sure if we would, and we were. So I was very grateful for that. So some other details about the stay would be kind of how often you're interrupted for tests and stuff like that. One thing I was impressed by was they were very strategic in how they set things up. So the first kind of 24 hours, they're checking on you a lot. So that means the first night there, you're interrupted a lot for tests and for checkups and stuff like that, which makes sense because you've just given birth and the baby has just been born, and they need to really keep a close eye on you at that time in the process. But after that, they really tried to make sure that everything was done during the day, and that during the night, our subsequent 2 nights, they left us almost completely alone. They left us to get our sleep, take care of our babies, and that was fantastic because it meant that the only thing really waking you up was your baby or your neighbor's baby. They started that around 9 o'clock in the morning. They would come in and start doing all of those tests and stuff like that. Like I said, I have never given birth in a hospital in the US before, so those of you who know these things, please correct me in the comment section down below. But from what I have heard, it can be a little bit more where you're kind of interrupted around the clock, but I could be wrong on that. Maybe it's the same system in the US as well, but I was very impressed by how they did it here. So then we come to discharge day, and basically discharge day is making sure all the ducks are in a row, that at you and baby everything is good with you, that there is nothing else you need to take care of document-wise, etc., etc. That is discharge day. And they tell you the day before what time you need to be discharged so you can communicate with your people about when to pick you up. One thing that's very different between discharge in the US versus discharge here is discharge here is a really big deal. Discharge in the US is not. Discharge here, the woman's expected to kind of dress up. The baby is dressed up. I know there's some other traditions that I'm not as familiar with, so please go into further detail on that in the comments so that anyone who's not Russian can read the comments and kind of see what is considered normal. I didn't really understand everything that was expected for discharge, so I just went on what I knew, but I would be very interested to read the comments if you could explain more like how discharge is usually handled. There's kind of a ritual to it from what I understand. My friend, the same one who came with me to the hospital, also came with Andrew to pick me up, and she took videos of us, and she took pictures of us, and she helped us get home, and we ordered a taxi as well, and that's how we ended up getting home. Some other miscellaneous interesting things about giving birth on Police OMS was, or just a Russian hospital in general, was you can't bring suitcases. You bring these special clear plastic bags that are designed for bringing things to the maternity hospital. I have never seen these things before. They do not exist in the US. This is something completely brand new to me. And please explain more about why they exist in the comment section down below. They were very convenient. I actually really love my set of plastic maternity bags, but it was definitely not something I've ever experienced in the US. That was definitely very interesting. Now, the second thing is more, I think, specific to the rodom you're in / whether or not you're giving birth for free. So in my case, I couldn't have really had Andrew there because in order to have the husband come to the birth, he needs to go through some health screenings. It's kind of a process to get him kind of cleared to be part of the birth process. Additionally, at least at the rodom that I'm near, he would have only been able to stay for a certain amount of time. Like, they're pretty strict about that. Visitation is another thing as well. As far as I'm aware, there's also the option to be in a part of the hospital where the husband can visit or stay with you, but that might depend on the rodom. But the part of the hospital I was in, visitation wasn't really a thing. Might have happened, I'm not sure, but overall, we weren't being visited by people. It was mostly staff and patients. Some other interesting miscellaneous differences is the beliefs when it comes to milk production. So here in Russia, it is understood that you should eat a lot of milk products to help your milk production, as well as cooked green apples, as far as I understand. So we always had a baked green apple every single day, and all the fruit that we consumed was cooked apple, which was awesome. It tasted great, but it was interesting. That's definitely not something that that's a tradition of ours back in the US. Not against it. Love it. It was great, but it's definitely not a tradition I was used to. The other thing is, I do think there is a difference in perspective when it comes to whether or not you need to eat a lot of milk products for milk production. Here, it seems to be the common tradition that is what you do. In the US, it definitely isn't. So that was definitely a very big difference between the two things as well. I love milk products, so that was fine with me. Another thing that was also different is that here they have a tuberculosis vaccine that they recommend for children, whereas in the US, I don't believe that exists at all. And I do believe there's some controversy over whether or not it's effective or not. I believe, let me know more in the comment section down below. I also thought that whole thing was interesting as well. Another interesting difference was the difference between swaddling and how the baby would sleep. So in the US, they do swaddles as well. I think that's pretty standard for the hospitals to do swaddles, but they are very strict about the fact that the baby has to stay on his or her back. Whereas here in Russia, it was more flexible. You could have the baby on the back, or they would often recommend actually that the baby be swaddled and then wedged on the side. Now, it was very safe how they set it up. The way they would set up the wedges was so that it was pretty much impossible for the baby to fall on her face. It was not going to happen. But it was a very good method because the baby slept very well, swaddled and on the side. They didn't sleep as well if they were swaddled on their backs. So that was, I think, a good piece of advice, a good trick there. Also, there is a very strong sense of getting you back to normal as quickly as possible. Whereas, at least with giving birth at home, the idea is there's so few interventions that they don't really do much to try to get you back on your feet as quickly as possible. The biggest advice is rest. Whereas here, it was, yes, rest, but they had lots of other techniques and things that they used to help you get healthier faster. And I did heal quite quickly afterwards, and I think it probably was because of the way I was being cared for. I was back on my feet quite quickly, and I think it's because of their techniques. There's so much more I could probably share, but that's probably enough for right now. It's probably a plenty long enough video. If you've gotten this far, thank you so much. So what are my thoughts overall? Would I do this again? Yes, I would do this again. They did a fantastic job. The medical professionals were amazing. The facility was fantastic, clean, modern, comfortable. It was a good experience, and I'm very, very grateful to be able to give birth like this for free. To put this in perspective, in the US, it can be insanely expensive to give birth. It does depend on your insurance, but a lot of people, when they give birth to a baby, are looking at a bill between $2,000 to $5,000. That's not uncommon. Whereas to be able to give birth here and have that level of care and have it be for free, I was shocked. So Russia's doing something right when it comes to this, and I'm very, very, very grateful. So thank you guys so much for watching. Please check out our links down below. We have links to our immigration lawyer, as well as links to our social media, our Telegram, our email address, and our Boosty in case you want to support us over there. Thank you so much for watching. I am very grateful for you guys, and we're glad to be back. And we will see you all in the next one. Bye.